So let's talk about Larry.
Okay, so she's out.
Larry, who was your husband and a great jazz musician himself. Where did you guys meet?
We met at York University. I met him a little bit before that at a place, it was a little music school that was run on DuPont Street called the New School of Music. It was set up by a guy named Howard Spring, who's a guitarist and also teaches.
I know Howard Spring.
Oh, do you know Howard Spring? Okay.
Howard Spring played the guitar in a show I did at York University.
You're kidding. Okay, well, he's a great guy. He started this music program just in a house, and this is actually when I came back from San Francisco. I was like, how am I ever going to learn how to play jazz? This white girl from
Canada,
middle class background. I don't have I'm supposed to have a certain, historical background to play jazz. I was wandering and really trying to figure out how. And was walking up Spadina Avenue one day, and I saw this house on DuPont that said New School of Music, and I just walked in, being curious, and then I found out there was some York students that were teaching jazz there, and there was workshops, and Howard Spring had set that whole thing up, and I just enrolled in 4 or 5 things. And at that point, I met Larry. He was coming in and playing some jam sessions and stuff that would happen. It was a little tiny house, but it was, it was fun. And I met him, and when I first met him, thought he was really very obnoxious. He came in and he was just heckling this guy, and then you! And I was like, who is this guy? And then later I saw him at York University while I was on my crutches and stuff, and we were sort of talking, and I thought, I really like this guy. And it was pretty fast after that. And
the two of you ended up playing in the same band at Yuck Yucks.
Yeah. Well, we were spelling each other off. I mean, he got the gig first, and then I would go in for him, and then I would go in for other. I would get hired to be there and stuff like that. So.
How was it for you? How did two musicians cohabitate?
Well, most of the time it's pretty good. The only difficult things is when things are going badly, especially because we do work together. It's not like we're both musicians doing separate things. We do separate things, but mostly we have our group together. And so when things are going difficult, you run into difficulties. If it's with us, we have a lot of visa problems and stuff with because of the context of the music that we play with Cubans and going to the U.S. and we have a lot of train crashes, put it mildly, where things are just go, up in your face, and what are we going to do? And you're both in this thing together, and that's when it's very difficult because sometimes these problems are really draining and exhausting, and you don't have the other person to sort of hey honey, didn't forget it, and we'll go out for a nice dinner. You're both like, that's when it's really difficult, and then sometimes you just kind of do get tired of each other, But you really have to keep. I just find both of us, we have to sort of keep. We just keep on top of stuff, just those little reality checks with people. I get out of line sometimes, and he gets out of line sometimes, and you get kind of.
You whack him with the flute.
Or vice versa.
But
generally it's good, The nicest thing is that we get to travel together and we get to experience, going to some incredible places, where we've had, just great musical experiences, meeting people, and you don't have to suffer the same element of homesickness, as you would.
I remember the jazz scene in Toronto, way back in George's Spaghetti House when Mo Kaufman and Guido Basso, Russ Little, all those guys were down there, and you go see them play. What was the jazz scene like for you, being, like you say, a white Canadian girl trying to play jazz? What was it like?
What was happening at the time when I was starting to play jazz was that there was 2 really great clubs, 3 maybe. Off and on, El Macombo would have, bring in some certain artists, and that would be pretty interesting. But Basin Street, there was nights where you could see so many of the foreign musicians, not foreign, but U.S. musicians, the greats, like the Clark Terrys, the Freddie Hubbards, the Chet Bakers, the list just goes on, of Johnny Griffin. every week there was, just an astounding Dexter Gordon. I saw Dexter Gordon like, God, I probably saw Dexter Gordon 10 times. Then there was
Joe Williams used to come
Joe
here
Williams,
a lot. Great jazz vocalist.
The Colonial. The Ornette Coleman, Mingus, Ross on Roland Kirk. It was just like, wow, it was incredible. I feel really fortunate that I was exposed to some really, really great music that inspired me. And when I started to play, and I have to say Larry was a real mentor to me because he was already doing a lot more playing. He was in a sort of a jump blues group doing Louis Jordan material called the Chucks Johnson and the Jive Bombers. He was the trumpet player in that, and it had a lot to do with sort of working with various people like Cleanhead Vincent and stuff like that. So he was ahead of me, and he was sort of guiding me a little bit in certainly giving me support in terms of starting to think about going out and playing in public a little bit. My first gigs were with a piano player named Marilyn Lerner, who I met up at York University, and we would go out and basically try and get gigs for ourselves. Like we'd go to like Winnie's, some little place called Winnie's, and say, wouldn't you like to have jazz in here? Some place in the colonnade, sitting right on the street. I really think you should have jazz in here. We would talk them into having it. So sometimes the gigs would last 2-3 weeks. Sometimes, a year. We played at Harper's, which I think it's a Magic or maybe even a comedy club now. I can't quite remember, on Adelaide Street. And we played 6 nights a week, the two of us, just learning, the American songbook and all the standards. And so that was really a great springboard for, just getting certain skills together, performing skills, but just learning music and working things out. And then it was about 1986 that I was playing a birthday party for Jim Galloway, and I took my horn because it was a jam session at it. It was his 50th, I think it was. And Ted O'Reilly was there, and he heard me play, and I got a call about 6 months later. He said, would I like to do a Sound of Toronto concert, the concerts at the Ontario Science Centre for 91.1 FM, which was formerly CJRT. So I said, yeah. And so I got off the phone, and the first thing I thought was, got to get a great drummer. This was now putting together a group for my first time. I'd only really been playing with Marilyn. And having just come back from New York, because Larry and I were doing some study in New York City with the great piano player and teacher, Barry Harris. We had seen Tony Williams playing at the Village Vanguard, and sitting right in front of Tony Williams' drum kit, and, this guy's just like playing his ass off, and it was just unbelievable. And I just kept thinking, gotta have the best drummer, best drummer to put this thing together. And I don't know if you know the name Claude Ranger, but he was really a great drummer. He worked with Mo Kaufman and many people, Sonny Greenwich, and he's now residing out in Vancouver, but he was from Montreal, and he was kicking around Toronto. And everyone was like, oh, Claude, he's a really wild French crazy guy, and, he never works, he's temperamental and crazy, but he was a really fiery drummer, very powerful. And so I called him up and I said, I have this concert, and would you consider playing with me? I'm putting together something. He said, yeah, it was wonderful. And then I called Brian Dixon, who's a piano teacher at Humber College, because he was recently now playing in Toronto. And we did our first concert at CJRT at the Science Centre, and Larry and myself, and I started preparing for the concert by writing some of my first tunes. And we got a great review in the Globe, and what I did was I made cassettes of the radio show, which nobody did in those days. Like, made cassettes of the radio show, and then I blew up the one article that we had that Mark Miller did in the Globe. That was a nice review, and I sent it out across Canada with the cassette. And it happened to be the first year that the jazz festivals were just collecting themselves across the country. And I got accepted to play these jazz festivals. So that was really the real launch. And it was just like these little steps.